Welcome to North Shore Green. Today we're going to be looking at Ecuador and the indigenous cultures in Ecuador. And today we have Cathy Michael, a 28-year resident of Marblehead who just has returned from an exciting trip in Ecuador. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you, Bill.
Now, as we get started, I would like to know a little bit about how you ended up going to Ecuador and what was your interest and your passion about going down there to visit the indigenous cultures down there.
Well, there are several things that pulled me down there. Number one, my absolute love of the rainforest. I had spent 3 previous winters, or parts of previous winters, in Costa Rica, in the rainforest, on the ocean, down when my daughter was in the Peace Corps. And I just feel like my heart and my soul is down there in the rainforest. So, well, after I became a facilitator for Awakening the Dreamer, and I heard there were rainforest journeys, I said, oh, yes, 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 yes. But there are many other reasons, too. I have this love of nature. To me, I find it a way to connect with the universe and just to feel at peace in the world. And so I wanted to spend some more time down in the rainforest. When I had met the people down in Costa Rica, they have this genuineness and this authenticity and this simpleness and simplicity in their lives that I admire, that it's something different from what we find up here. So I wanted to go find out and see a little bit more about that and spend some more time with people down there.
And you mentioned that you're a facilitator for the Awakening Dreamer program here. Can you tell us a little bit about that and who sponsors the tour?
The tour is sponsored by Pachamama Alliance. About 10, 12 years ago, the indigenous people living down in the rainforest of the Amazon, the Achuar down in the rainforest of Ecuador, had noticed that the weather patterns were changing and things were a little bit strange. And
the Achuar are an intact indigenous culture in the rainforest,
yes.
Not connected to the modern world in any way.
No,
Okay.
no, they're deep in many millions of miles or millions of down in the rainforest. They noticed that their rivers were they were getting polluted, and the crops weren't growing in the same kind of way as they had before. And they had, by clockwork, were able to time their plantings, and they used to go to the the waterfalls. They would go there to speak with the spirits, and they felt like the spirits were leaving the waterfalls. And they go, what is going on here? Because what they realized, what this pollution was coming from, was they realized that oil was digging deep down, and it was polluting their rivers, and their people were starting to get diseases that they had never gotten before. And they realized they couldn't deal with this on their own. They needed the help of the white man.
So an indigenous culture put out a call to the Western world,
Yeah,
the world that was using the oil, to come down and help them.
Yes.
And they went down there and supported the indigenous cultures in South America, in Ecuador in this case.
At the same time, they were having dreams, and their visions were telling them, contact the white man, you're going to need some help from the white man. But they'd always been petrified. These are people deep, deep down the Amazon, millions of acres and miles of land down there. And they had never seen white men before, some of these different indigenous tribes, and getting these visions like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So they went and sent out a dream themselves and a call to the north, or to the modern world, to come down and help them and work with them. They realized they could not do this on their own. And so several people heard the call. John Perkins, who wrote The Economic Hitman, Lynn Twist, who wrote The Soul of Money. They came down, they brought a contingent down, and what they helped them do was they helped the Achuar get written into the Constitution of Ecuador rights for nature. This was the first country in the world to put rights for nature into their constitution, which means nature could now be protected. People living on the lands would have to be consulted, and nature would have to be taken into consideration before there was mining or drilling.
The Pachamama Alliance organized the indigenous cultures of Ecuador to have representation in the Ecuadorian government. And as a result, they were able to get a Bill of Rights for Nature.
Yes.
That's exciting.
Lynn and Bill and the others asked, what can we do for you now? And they said, here's what you can do. You can go back up north and change the dream of the North. Because if you guys weren't putting all these demands on our rainforest, we would not be cutting them down in the first place.
Tell us a little bit about how you got to Ecuador.
Oh, we fly from Boston to Miami,
Uh-huh.
a layover in Miami, and then from Miami to Quito, the capital of Ecuador. And that's where our trip began, in Quito.
And then you moved on to an indigenous culture, as I understand it, in the mountains, and then from that indigenous culture down to the...
Yes, we drove through Otavalo to see the Otavalo marketplace, and then to 2 hours north of Quito to stay in the highlands, the Andes highlands, with the San Clemente people. And then we took an 8-hour drive way down to the Amazon, and then an airplane, a tiny little airplane ride way over the Amazon into the forest, almost on the borders of Peru.
The map shows the route that you took to get to the San Clemente, and then to the rainforest, and then back. And the dashed lines are on the map are air flights. Otherwise, it's the solid lines are buses. And the culture in Ecuador, is there a little history behind the indigenous cultures and how they interface with the more modern world culture?
I'll give you a little bit of history of Ecuador. It was in the 1500s that the King of Spain ran out of money, and so he said to all the private landowners that he would sell them land if they would Christianize the population.
And this is in Ecuador.
Yes,
So
in Ecuador.
Ecuador was a colony of Spain in the
yes.
1500s. Okay.
So the landowners, instead of Christianizing them, they turned them into slave labor. They enslaved them for 500 years of slavery. And this is about half the population of Ecuador was enslaved by these hacienda owners. And these were called encomenderos.
Very, very typical imperialist colonization of foreign countries and third world countries. Still going on today.
This brings us up to 1998 or 2000, when the president at that time, there was terrible debt going in Ecuador at that point, and the president of the time decided to turn the sucrose from 8,000 sucrose, had equaled $1. When the next morning people woke up, now imagine 25,000 sucrose equal $1. And this unfortunately hit the peasants and the poor agrarian people because they had all their money in sucrose, whereas the wealthy landowners had their money in US dollars already in bigger banks. And so there was more unrest once again, and government ended up changing several times in early 2000s. But during that time, Manuel, who became the leader of the San Clemente Andes Highlands people, he remembered the ways of his ancestors. And he remembered how they lived with the land, off the land, on the land. And they were prosperous, and they lived in abundance. And all this came back to him, and he was able to restructure their community in such a way so that they could share and cooperate and help each other and live off the land. And as you can see, they have very beautiful homes. They've been able to build their homes themselves.
It's like they turned their back on the Ecuadorian federal financial institutions and refocused on local economies and local sustainability. That's a very interesting thing. That's a wisdom that I think is going to become more and more important as we move forward in the evolution of the human species in the modern world.
They did, and they've been offered tractors and fossil fuel vehicles to plow their fields, and they don't want any part of it. They yoke up the bull and plow the fields. The husband and wife will plow together, and everything's organic. They will use their seeds, can be used over for 5 years, and then they'll go down to Peru, make a trek down there and exchange seeds, and come back with a new bunch of seeds.
Wow, this is great. I mean, it sounds like also there's equity between male and female in this culture too.
Yeah, you can see the respect in their eyes. You can see by the way they look at each other and the way they help each other with the similar tasks.
Wow, there's much to be learned here.
The trip began in Quito. The rainforest journeys set us up in a little cafe called Cafe Cultura. Here's the amazing inside, and I arrived 4 days early because I extended my 12-day trip into an almost month trip. So I stayed an extra 4 days in Quito, and so Luckily, I was put up at this charming little place because it was raining. This was the rainy season in April when I went, and it rained every day. And Quito is, even though it's on the equator, you might think it's hot, but no. We were 9,500 feet high, which made it around 55 degrees every day, and rainy, and sometimes pouring rain every day. So it was darn cold. I wore long johns every day, and some days it was even hard to go outside. The rain was pouring so hard. So here's my favorite little man who worked at Café Cultura. He was my best friend while I stayed there for several days, and he only spoke Spanish, so I got to work on my Spanish. Here is a typical street scene, and you can see it's overcast, and the sun came out for a moment here. And now here's that typical overcast sky with those clouds everywhere you walk. And Café Cultura was in the new part of Quito. Quito is divided up into a new Quito and the old Quito. So we were in new Quito, and as you can see, it's not necessarily that new right here. And here was my favorite craft shop, favorite cafe. And here's the group. The group came in 4 days later. This is it, our entire group, and they all were from New Zealand. 4 of them came in from New Zealand, and Ruel, our facilitator, and Julian, our Ecuadorian facilitator, who spoke Spanish and translated when translation was necessary. We had our first meeting here in the dining room of Café Cultura, and then we left, and then the next morning, we had one morning in Quito, day in Quito together, and we went to Old Town Quito. So here's some of the architecture left from the Spanish colonial times. And a dancer in the street. And here is Quito again. As you can see, all the houses in the hillside. I like to paint these, so I took many of these photos. Now we're on the road up to Otavalo on our way to our first community. But first, the stop at the big Otavalo market, which many of you may have heard about. It's the famous Ecuadorian market. p.m. and they know that rainstorm's coming at 3 o'clock. They feel it in the air, and we can see it. They're packing up as fast as they can. You can see the big bundles. They carry them on trucks, on their backs, on bicycles. I love to watch how they maneuver around with these heavy packs. And the doors of Quito are magnificent. Now we're on our way up to San Clemente, leaving Otavalo, and here we are in El Mitad del Mundo, the middle of the world, right on the equator line. Again, those ominous clouds in the background. In one of the volcanoes of Ecuador. There are many, many volcanoes in Ecuador, and there are times when you can see several at a time, and 2 are live and spewing right at this moment. Now, right before we got to San Clemente, we stopped off down the street with some indigenous people who, indigenous Yachak, which is a shaman, and she gave us a healing and a cleansing, of which I won't necessarily go into details, but supposedly they cleansed us and purified us. And here's us with their family, and there's little Maria Juana, the shaman, in the small woman in the middle, on the left, and her children and her grandchildren. And she had three assistants helping her. And here we are, by the way, we're getting this cleansing in this 55-degree room, and they are spraying some alcohol spirits and sugar spirits on us, and it was cold. And then we arrive at San Clemente, and the pouring rain about 6:30 p.m. when the sun had set, and dark as can be, and we're then told that we're each going to divide up into different families and stay with a different family. And so we arrive at this little entryway right here, and out comes this woman with this most beautiful smile. And I said, okay, I'll go there. I stay there. And so Jen, Carl, and I went and stayed there. And here we are the next morning cooking tortillas, helping her make the tortillas in her oven. And as you can see, it's a wood oven. And outside here, there's a small solar heater that is used for the little bit of electricity that they use. The lights are so dim that at night, when I tried to read, I could barely read with the lights that there are. And these homes, even though it's like 55 degrees and rainy all the time, you can see how it's open to the outside. So the entire home is open like this to the outside, and then there are several enclosed rooms. I did have my own bedroom. And the dining room here is, the whole entire wall next to it is open to the elements. So when we ate dinner, yeah, it was cold. And here's the view as we walk up the hill to meet the others who are staying up the hill. Here's the view looking back. It's glorious.
These are the mountain indigenous people in Ecuador. So can you tell us a little bit about the culture as we're going through the slides here? This looks like a monument.
This is their sundial. They live by the sundial. They do not have a calendar because calendar is sort of useless to them starting on January 1st. They divide the year up into the quadrants with the solstices and the equinox, and their year starts on March 20th, and that's when they start planting. And their big celebration is the solstice in June, because that's when food is plentiful by now. And that is their biggest holiday that they celebrate. They do not celebrate birthdays. They do not celebrate Christmas or other holidays. They celebrate the solstice and the equinox. And their biggest one is June. It will go on for 3-4 days, and then it will even continue on for the rest of the summer. And they live off the land and with the land, and they're so part of the land that they believe in sharing, and so wealth is almost by he who shares the most, and he who shares the most is he who has the most. Here's Manuel in the middle, and he has become the leader of the community, and he will be the one that will provide the majority of the food during the ceremonies because he has the most.
And you told me before that this culture rejects all of the modern convenience and technology. And they tend to live more sustainably within their bioregion or within the region in which they live.
Let me show you what we got to do with them. Here we go. We're grinding grain with them here. They use all the old-fashioned mechanisms again, and we're milking the cow, and now we're yoking up the bull in order to plow the fields, and here they are, and we're helping them. We got to help them plow the fields, and they've been offered tractors. They've been offered some fossil fuel vehicles, and they said, no, we don't want that. We don't need that, and we don't want that. And companies tried to bribe them and give them this, but they said, no, we can do it our way. So their soils are totally organic. They won't use fertilizer. They were able to use their seeds they can use for 5 years over, and then they'll go down to Peru and exchange seeds and then continue on. And here we are plowing the fields. And the quinoa, we got to prepare the quinoa with them. First, when the quinoa comes out of the fields, they'll put them in the eaves in between the roofs and the walls to dry. And now here you can see we're going to take the quinoa and rub it and flatten it out on that stone, rub it against the stone.
The quinoa is a staple.
Yeah, quinoa is a grain. Some people may not be familiar with quinoa because it's somewhat like rice, and it can be eaten instead of rice. And it has a lot of protein in it. And then they take the quinoa and wash it because apparently there are toxins in the quinoa. So here Manuel is helping his wife wash it. There's absolute equality between the men and the women in this community. The respect that I can see in their eyes for each other is daunting.
So it's a true partnership.
Yeah.
They share the chores and they share the responsibilities.
Yeah, as you saw out there in the picture with the bulls and plowing the fields, both the men and the women, the husband and the wife, are out there plowing together.
And they're very happy.
They'd smile nonstop. Oh, and the other thing, at the dining room table when we ate, they gave us these sumptuous meals that were just full of all of their own food that they had grown and prepared themselves. And it was endless, almost more food than we could possibly eat. And I do eat a lot.
This kind of reminds me of the movie The Economics of Happiness. It's about a northern Indian region, the Ladakhi, and they pretty much have lived for a long time off the land in very similar ways, and they are rejecting the modern world pressures in order to continue their lifestyle that way. So there are many indigenous cultures all over the world doing this. This is exciting.
Many people have asked me, how is it that they can continue to reject your lifestyle, especially when we come to them with our iPads and our iPods and our paraphernalia, and don't they want it? Don't they want more like we have? Actually, not. They are so grounded in nature and so grounded in their way of life. They're happy and they're fulfilled, and they have seen what the ways of the North has done. And one thing I didn't get to mention before was that they have a different dream than we have. And what Pachamama.org is, and Awakening the Dreamer is all about, it's about changing the dream of the North, because the North has a dream of acquisition and consumerism, and we can see, and they can see, how it's gotten us in trouble. And it hasn't brought happiness, and it hasn't brought fulfillment, and it's brought violence and wars, and they're so aware of this that they don't want it.
And this tour was sponsored by the Pachamama Alliance, so that this connection to this community probably is unique among tours to Ecuador, that they have built up a relationship with the indigenous people that they are supporting down there, and have created a connection that gives you this unique point of view.
By living with the people, that is the best way to see how they live, and it also gives them a little bit of money so that it helps them out too. And that is another reason for families opening their houses to us and Pachamama working with them to do so. As I said, it's 50, 55 degrees there. The only heat is this fireplace. And here's part of a sumptuous meal that we were eating. And then on the last night before we were to leave, the moms of each of our moms dressed us up in their clothing. They gave us their clothing to wear. And this is clothing they wear every single day. You can see this white peasant blouse and skirt, and they don't get cold. Only we got cold. And then they put on a little, they had musicians playing Peruvian music, and here we were dancing and drinking tea, and it was wonderful, our last night. And then as we left, they gave us these beautiful rainbow striped scarves depicting both unity and diversity.
So now you're about to leave the mountains and move on to the rainforest.
Yes.
You're at 9,000 feet in the mountains, is that right?
Yes, actually they're 10,000 feet. They're a little bit higher than Quito, so it was even a little colder there than Quito.
The bus trip down to catch an airplane to fly into the
Yes, it is. It's about an 8-hour bus trip past some beautiful, beautiful scenery. And we first stopped at this little town, and as you see, most little towns in Ecuador have a little square, a sweet little square in the middle. We ended up in Puyo.
Puyo.
We took the airplane.
Where you
Puyo.
caught an airplane
Yes.
for them.
And on the way, we went through many climate changes. We went through some hot weather, some chilly weather, some sunny weather, some rainy weather. We went through every climate change possible.
And you're now moving toward the indigenous culture that actually helped create the Pachamama Alliance. So you're going to meet with the Achuar at the end of this plane trip that you're taking.
We had beautiful, beautiful scenery on the way down. We drove past mountains, past volcanoes, and here's a scene of an absolutely beautiful mountain scene, just typical of the way down. And then we landed our night before going out to Puyo. We stayed at this small little El Jardin inn with birds, with parrots just popped here on the railing.
So you're in the tropics now with the birds and the parrots. That's great. That's great.
Totally new climate now. We took a 10-seater airplane I had not ever been in a small little airplane. And so a few of us got quite nervous, and we went through quite a time with it. But finally we got on the airplane, and this little airplane is so loud if you've ever been in a little airplane.
Right.
And it just drowned out all thought, and I managed to get myself into a little visualization that I was able to hold us being protected by this noise and a cloud around us.
We used to call them bug smashers because they never went higher than the bugs flew. So.
And in the meantime, we went over this, what everybody calls broccoli, because if you look at these photos, it's like traveling over broccoli with the windy Pastaza River underneath us here.
So the rich rainforest now is showing up from the air in a different sort of experience than you had when you were in the mountains.
Yes, the vegetation is totally different.
And the river looks a little brown.
And the brown is from soil erosion. It's not because it's dirty, because the rainforests are, there's not very much soil there. And so they erode very easily, and that ends up in the water, turning it brown. When we landed, the whole town comes to visit. You can see all the little children and the parents come and visit the airplane that arrives.
That must be an exciting event for them, huh?
Absolutely. And then the first thing that we did was we walked about 100 feet away from where this airplane is, and we went with one of the shaman into his little hut. There's no walls, there's just merely a roof. We had chicha with him. And chicha is a yucca drink, and this is what they survive on. This is their favorite food. And so while the shaman would sit in the middle of his hut, and we would sit on little tree stumps. The only seats and the only furniture were tree roots, tree trunks. So each of us had a little tree trunk to sit on in a semicircle around the shaman, and he talked to us about their dream culture and how important dreams are to them and how the dreams guide them.
And this has a connection to the Awakening Dreamer program that you're a facilitator for, which we'll cover later, but that's interesting. It's a dream culture that, as I understand it, they plan their days, weeks, months, years based on the dreams that they have. And they do it as a family thing too.
It absolutely is a family thing. As a matter of fact, we got to go to 2 of these dream ceremonies. We were woken up at 3:30 in the morning to go to a dream ceremony, and which actually wasn't such a hard thing to do because we basically were sleeping outside. As you'll see, we had no walls around us, and so we were out there in the elements. And once you're out in the elements, it's very easy to wake up very early and then trudge through the rainforest about a mile to where this other shaman was. First, we drank a guayasa tea, and then we would tell him what each of our dreams were. And he spoke only Quechua, so it went from our English to our Spanish interpreter to the Quechua interpreter to the shaman, and then back all the way.
Oh my
goodness. He listened
goodness.
to all of our dreams in that fashion.
You wonder how the interpretations ended up. I've been in parties where we sit in a circle and whisper a phrase, and to the next person they whisper it essentially the same idea all the way around, and then at the end it becomes totally different than the original. You had 3 translations.
Yes.
before you were able to communicate with
Yes.
with the Achuar.
The chicha is a yucca root. The yucca is grown sort of like a potato. And the way that they make this chicha is the women do all the gardening and the cooking, and it's a lot of heavy work. They'll carry on their backs an amazing amount of a huge basket, about as big as diameter 3 feet by 3 feet. They'll boil them up in a big pot, and then they chew the yucca. They pull it out of the pot, they chew the yucca, and they spit it back in the big pot because their saliva will then help it to ferment. So the yucca ferments, and when you ferment a food, it becomes much more nutritious. And then after it's cooked up and they smash it and mash it and it becomes like a soup. And then they serve it in their bowls. They make their own bowls. And while her husband is talking to us, she brings one at a time to each of us a bowl of chicha, and we drink it, we just slurp it right out of the bowl. It actually was delicious. And they eat it so much, and they find that when any of them who do travel to other parts of the world, when they come back, the first thing they want is their chicha.
So it's a comfort food too, right?
Yes.
It's also the staple and the comfort food for them.
Yes.
And it's all liquid, so their
Yes.
diet is mostly liquid.
Yes. Unfortunately, they have hunted in the past too much, and because their populations have grown, they have, in this one particular community, they have killed all the animals there, and so they don't have any meat.
So there's no game there.
No,
They're
there's no
not
game
sustainable.
there.
They haven't been sustainable in their hunting practice. And are they hunter-gatherers, or are they more agricultural?
They are agricultural now. Since the missionaries came, they had been hunter-gatherers and they had been nomads, but then the missionaries came, and one of the biggest effects or results of the missionaries being there was the missionaries caused them to stop moving and to build up home in one place and live there, and that is what caused this.
So if missionaries hadn't come, they would still be hunter-gatherers and moving from place to place to allow the game to repopulate the areas that they had been in.
That's right.
But because they were stationary, they then caused most of the game to go extinct, I guess. That's really interesting because I don't think of indigenous people as having consciousness to do that, but because of the influence of the missionaries, they were
absolutely the influence. Yes.
Okay.
I'll show you how we actually got to where we stayed. First, we took this this boat 45 minutes down the river, and this boat is motorized, but they are now building these same boats with solar power, so that they can stop using the fossil fuels in the river.
Solar power, great.
Yes, Fundación Pachamama in South America that's working with them on this in Ecuador. Yes.
So we're bringing technology to the wisdom of the indigenous people. Right?
Yes. Yes, and that brings me to the prophecy of the eagle and the condor.
Uh-huh.
A 500-year-old prophecy that says one day the people of the eagle and the people of the condor would live together, as the eagle and the condor would fly together. And the people of the eagle are those of the modern world who have built just beautiful buildings, beautiful artwork, amazing technology, and use their minds, whereas the people of the condor live in their heart, and they live close to nature, and they use their intuitive abilities.
And so we have the eagle and the condor coming together after 500 years. As I understand it, it's a 500-year prophecy. Every 500 years there's a change, and then we're in the period of the eagle and the condor coming together. And the wisdom of the indigenous culture and the technology or the mind, intellect of the modern world are coming together to solve the problems that of the world, hopefully. And in this case, it's a solar-powered boat on the river in Ecuador.
Or a Pachamama Alliance coming down to work with the Achuar. And the Achuar, they are using the iPad. They're using it to make documentaries of themselves and their way of life. And so technology,
Wow.
They are using technology too.
Wow. And the power for the iPads must be coming from solar.
So here's our trek through the jungle. We trekked through about 1.5 miles or 2 miles from the shore to get to where we were staying. And these are, as I mentioned, it's still the muddy season down here. It's still a rainy season. Rainy season goes through April or May. So we would sometimes trudge through a foot deep of mud. And so it was quite a challenge, and it was quite fun. And the women of the Achuar, they carry their babies in this absolutely beautiful little way, usually pink wrap slung around the baby. And not only do they have a baby on their side and maybe a baby in the belly, but they are carrying some of our water and our food supplies on their back at the same time, walking through this same muddy field barefoot. We were given big black boots, and they walked barefoot. Here is where we stayed. This is called Tinkius Lodge. Pachamama worked with them to build this, and this is just what their homes look like. The only difference is we're up on boards. You can see that we're elevated off the ground. They are right on the hard packed. We each had a board to sleep on, and a 1-inch air mattress, and a mosquito net. And it was delightful. I had no idea where we were going, but here's where we were, and it was fine.
And it was warm enough for you, because in the mountains
Yes,
you were cold.
it's
as I
not cold
recall.
here. It's down at sea level, and so almost sea level, and so on the equator, so we're back up in the 80s and the 90s.
Very nice.
But never too hot either. So here's our entire little complex, our inn.
So there's a series of decks that connect the...
Yes, they connect the kitchen in each of our little housing units. In the bathroom, we actually had a compost toilet and a solar heated water. Here's another picture of the beautiful women once again.
They don't look real happy.
No, they don't look real happy, but by the last day, we were able to, we did some communication with them. Basically, they started painting our faces, and we started to have, it was very hard to communicate with them because of the language barrier.
Right, the three
Yes.
transitions.
Yes, so unfortunately that made it tough.
What activities did you participate in and your observations?
We did a lot of hiking with the Achuar. This is a hike that we went on here with this big tree. They say houses the spirit of a shaman. This is the lagoon where we got to swim in here for fun, where this is where they wash their clothes, bathe themselves. This is it for their...
This is on the river, a lagoon on the river? Or
no, it's not way down on the river. It came inland a little more,
okay.
Closer to where our, because we were 2 miles in off that main river. So we did go one day and spend with the women. Our women went with their women, watched how they garden. Our men went with their men as they made baskets. The men do the basket weaving there. And here's one of the Achuar making a basket. It took him about 10 minutes, and he used these palm fronds to create a basket. And here our men are with theirs making baskets.
So the men are learning how to make baskets.
That's right.
You didn't participate in this, I take it?
No, the women did not do that. Instead, we went gardening. And watched her garden. But she worked so fast. I have never in my life seen anybody work so fast. She cleared a space, made a little fire to keep the mosquitoes away. And actually, there were not very many mosquitoes down there. And she would pull out these roots, and they were yucca roots. And then she'd break off the branches and put them back in the ground to reroot. And then with her machete, everything with a machete, she would cut off the skin of the yucca and put them in a bag. In about 15 minutes, she had an entire basket filled.
Sounds like she could teach a course in permaculture.
I'm sure she could. So one day we got to kayak on the lagoon. Early in the morning. I think we went 4:30 in the morning to catch sunrise.
Wow.
On the lagoon.
So your day was in asleep early in the evening and awake early in the morning?
Yes, the sun, down on the equator, there's a pretty much 12-hour days.
Right.
Always, year-round.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much 6 to 6, give or take. So after 6 p.m., it's dark, 6:30 p.m., so we would have dinner and go to sleep, and then everybody wakes up even before dawn. Got to have a sharing ceremony where they played some of their music and sang their songs and danced, and we danced and played some of our music and sang some of our songs on the last night that we were there. They put their crafts out for display, and we got to buy some of their beautiful pottery and jewelry. And on the last day, we made some communication with the girls, and she started painting our faces.
Now you can talk a little bit about the difference between the male and female culture in the Achuar village as opposed to in San Clemente, where it was totally different.
The very distinction of chores down here in the rainforest. The women do the gardening, the cooking, the preparing. The men do the basket making. The men make the decisions. The men are the shaman.
There are no women shamans.
Not in this village.
Right.
There are women shaman elsewhere in South America, but not here in the
In the
Achuar.
rainforest, or
other parts of rainforest will
Okay.
have women shaman.
Okay.
Yes, matter of fact, when we were up in San Clemente, the equality between men and women seemed much, much more on par. And there were women shaman. There was a woman shaman who performed our cleansing ceremony in San Clemente.
right.
Yes.
My partner Carol goes to Peru, but she goes to the Andes, and there are women shaman in the Andes. And as you and I talked previously, there were no women shaman in the rainforest. I wonder if that's true for all cultures in the rainforest, whereas in the Andes or in the mountains, it's women have more equality. I don't know, but I'm just speculating that maybe it's the same. I'm wondering if, a hunter-gatherer society had those distinct separations, where in the Andes those cultures did not have that distinction.
Yes, it may come from that, yes. Now we're on our very last night. The airplane never came for us on the last day. We spent the whole day hanging out waiting for the airplane. It never came. We never found out why, but we set up shop. The Achuar people had to trek for 5 hours once they heard our plane didn't come to get our mosquito nets and our mattresses, and
Oh my
we felt
goodness.
terrible.
So it sounds like modern day air travel. You know, been
Yeah,
stuck
the
in
satellite
airports for
connections
24
didn't work,
hours.
the
and,
radar didn't work.
Yeah.
Often it goes down.
Yeah,
Yep, and you also need good weather to fly in, because the radar isn't as
important.
good as our radar. So the next morning, it had rained and rained and rained. That was one of the reasons that kept the plane from coming. There was a lot of mud on the runway. As you can see, it's a dirt runway. So the little kids were in there with buckets swooping out the water from the runway, and then the pilot asked everybody in the village to push the airplane all the way back to the field as far as it could go into the weeds and the grass and the foliage, so he could have a little bit longer of a runway. And I sat right behind the pilot as we took off, and I could feel his angst in there. And then taking off as he on the runway, and as he lifted up, he went, ah. And as he turned around the bend, there was the most magnificent vista of 5 volcanoes.
Wow.
The sun was rising, and 5 volcanoes, one of them spewing lava, was off in the entire ride back to Puyo. So after we arrived back there, we then took off for the very last part of our trip, and we had a day left to go to Hotel Manteles, 2 hours north up in the mountains. And on the way, we stopped first in Baños, which I found was one of the sweetest little towns in Ecuador. It's a backpacker town. It's a town where people go kayaking and whitewater rafting and zip lining. It's a very adventurous town. And when we got there, there was ash in the streets. There was a yellow or orange alert out because one of the volcano was spewing, and people were walking with white masks. And we found out that this town has had 3 red alerts in the last 20 years or so. And the first red alert, everybody was told to leave. And they did. When they came back, they found out their homes had been looted. So they said, we are never leaving again. And they said, instead we will pray to the Virgin Mary in the streets. And the next 2 red alerts, that's what they did. They went out in the streets and they prayed, and nothing happened. Everything was fine. So then we left Baños, and we had lunch at this wonderful place, which was quite the opposite of being in the rainforest. Here is some scenery as we're leaving there along the way back to Quito.
What a wonderful trip. You're ending your trip with the Pachamama Alliance, and you're going to go off on your own for a retreat, 8 days. Tell us a little about the retreat, because when you explained it to me, it sounded so amazing.
I had picked a wonderful place to go stay at so that I could integrate all the information, reflect, meditate, read, write, for 8 days to think about everything that I had just lived through. And that's exactly what I did. I found this little place where we had to travel on this little swing across from the rest of the world over to its little part in the universe in Mindo Cloud Forest, 2 hours northwest of Quito. And it's only 25 miles, but it's 2 or 3 hours to get there. And as a matter of fact, it took us 3 hours to get there because they closed the main road because of a landslide. So we went by some other route, which was absolutely spectacular. And then I ended up in this tiny little cabin where I spent 8 days of heaven in the cloud forest. So this is 2,500 feet high. So the weather was much, much warmer than San Clemente, where it was 10,000 feet high. And there was a roaring river right on the grounds, and trails, and people could go, again, zip lining, whitewater rafting, bird watching.
And how many people were at this resort when you were there?
Very few. Everybody had their own cabin. There were maybe only 6 cabins. And for 3 days, nobody was there. I was the only one, plus the staff. So I got to spend some time with the staff, and they only spoke Spanish. So again, we would play Spanish games and English games because they wanted to learn English and I wanted to learn Spanish. So we pulled out the iPhone and we had these little games on there that we would play together, Spanish and English games, and teach each other. And it was great. I had a great time with them.
Sounds so idealistic. And this is not part of the Pachamama Alliance tour,
No,
right?
this I added on. I stayed almost the month of April. The trip itself was 12 days.
It's interesting to point out that the indigenous cultures have a wisdom about their relationship to the earth that allows them to resist some of the pressures from the modern world that you've talked about and that you teach about or talk about in your Awakening the Dreamer program. I am also a facilitator for the Awakening the Dreamer program, and I have not been to Ecuador, so I'm really looking forward to going down there, because you must have amazing insight about what you're talking about now as a facilitator. You're more connected, I think, to the Awakening the Dreamer program than people that have not been to Ecuador. So this is an important event, I think, for all of us to do, to really connect with the indigenous cultures and to see that life can be amazing without all the modern day conveniences. If you're in a community that supports you and you can live in a way that you know, the real measure of it is the happiness that these people feel. So
yes, we can live a sustainable, a just, and a and we all can live a thriving peace on this earth.
And it isn't about letting go of our technology. It's about using the indigenous wisdom and reusing the technology in a way that supports our relationship to the earth and relationship to each other. So now that you're back, what do you feel that the trip has contributed to your, at least Awakening the Dreamer program, or even just your life focus?
Well, personally, it has made me much more in touch with nature. As I said, I've always loved the rainforest, and so now I've been able to translate that back to here to the northern nature and northern foliage. And I've managed to build myself a cute little garden of only 20 by 20 feet, but I can feel out there almost what I can feel in the rainforest, which is I can just feel that connection and that oneness that I have always felt in the rainforest before. And it also makes me think a lot more about sustainability and all the little things that I do. Like I can make sure that when I'm doing errands around town, I take a walk or ride my bike instead of driving the car. Or when I go into Boston, I take the T instead of driving into Boston. All these ways that I can help to make a more sustainable world. Those are just a couple little things.
Sounds like it made you more aware of the choices you have and the consequences of those choices. Just maybe you were aware of them before you went down there, but re-energized that awareness. How would people now take the same tour that you took? Can you tell us a little bit about how you
Sure.
set this up?
You can go online and type in Pachamama.org, Pachamama.org, and under there you will find a link for Awakening the Dreamer. You can find out more about that. You'll find a link for Rainforest Journeys.
And other programs that the Pachamama Alliance
Yes.
offers. That ends our episode of Cathy Michael's trip to Ecuador. If you want to find out about those tours that the Pachamama Alliance sets up, please go to the website www.pachamama.org, and you should be able to find a link that connects you to Pachamama Tours. They take a limited number of people, and they don't try to overwhelm the indigenous cultures that they support down there. So take a look at it and see if it works for you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Cathy. Thank you for bringing this wonderful trip to our awareness.
Thank you, Bill.